let's review this real quick. Of course, Texas, Oklahoma to the SEC. It became official today. We know that's going to happen. There's going to be quite the battle about when that's going to happen, because if everything plays out to the letter of the law and the contracts, how they're currently signed, they're not released until the calendar year, sports year 25-26. I don't see that happening. Too much bad blood, too much money on the line, too much all of that. There's going to be contracts that are going to be torn up and renegotiated and money exchanged hands. And this situation cannot just hang in the balance for 5 years. Exactly. That's not going to happen. There's just, again, too much money on the line for the SEC. We can't have a lame duck league sitting there for 5 years. All of that. There's just so many reasons why it won't happen. But of course, I got to say, before we move on to the Pac-12/Oregon slice of this, Mike, for as much as I have ripped on Bob Bowlesley, the Big 12 commissioner, in recent, even before this situation, I certainly had my issues with how he was running the league from a football standpoint. Mm-hmm. And then this came down, coming a couple weeks after the Big 12 media days, in which he stated, when asked about conference expansion and realignment, there's really nothing in the works. He just made himself look awful. Okay, despite all my criticisms, and I'm not the only one, I will say this move that he has made with this cease and desist letter, for as much as it might be just fluff and not be reasonable or have any backing, hey, he's at least going down with a fight. Either there's substance there that can be legally backed, and he's going to take a chunk out of ESPN and Texas and Oklahoma, really ESPN, and he's going to go down with at least some dignity, and with he's going to take some swings going down, or it's something. It's he's taking a shot at least.
Yeah, I think he is, and I think he might have a little bit of something if they could pull anything out of that ESPN All-American or the American Athletic Conference thing. Other than that, I think the main factor involving this is the clause in the Big 12 agreement that says even if there is just one team standing that could sue the rest of the schools for the downfall of the Big 12. And to kind of piggyback off of your comment about how they're not going to be in here too much longer, Texas and Oklahoma, do you remember when Nebraska was moving out of the conference and they played that 1 year, how chippy those games were getting between Nebraska and the other Big 12 teams? I think it's dangerous to some of the players on Texas and Oklahoma for them to stay in the conference more than 1 year.
That's a great point, because, and think of how much more impactful this is. So Nebraska leaving the league was, okay, one of your big members is leaving the league and it got chippy. This is your two biggest members that are holding the whole league together are leaving, and your league is disintegrating. So it will be interesting to see this play out. It's also going to be interesting to evaluate. Let's say they only play one more football season. Maybe it's two, maybe to see and evaluate Oklahoma and Texas, especially Oklahoma, considering this is supposed to be the best Oklahoma team we've seen in a long, long time, to see once they get to the playoff, if they get to the playoff, but that's the expectation, and meet an SEC team or two, how they perform and how there's going to be a lot of talk based on the performance in those games to either say, whoa, SEC, Oklahoma really brought it this year. Maybe they'll do better than we thought. Or, no, same Oklahoma. They just got dusted by 4 touchdowns by Alabama. They're not going to challenge for the SEC. Look, and all the jokes are going to roll.
Yeah, I personally am of the opinion if Oklahoma does not succeed this year with the caliber of quarterback I think Spencer Rattler is, I just don't know if I could trust them again if they don't succeed with the team they have now. Their defense has gotten better every year over the past few years. They have Spencer Rattler. They still have Lincoln Riley. They've still been landing all these recruits. They're landing defensive talent. This is the year they have to do something. You have to win a playoff game or keep it close at the very least. If you're the 4 seed playing the 1 seed, then okay, you can lose, but keep it close. Don't get blown out by 30.
The last performance against LSU was like an all-time embarrassment. When you give up 7 touchdowns in the first half, not
Doesn't
7
matter
touchdowns in the
how
game.
good the LSU team is. If you're a playoff team, you should not be allowing 7 touchdowns and a half.
No. Clemson, people think back on that championship game as Clemson being blown out. It was 28-25 with like 10 minutes left in the game. That was a good game until the last 10 minutes. I watched like 4 plays, and I was like, LSU's going to kill them.
I watched 4 plays, and I was like, we should have got that spot.
Well, yeah, I'm sure you did. I'm sure you did. But there was that trip to Tempe late in the season.
Yeah. 9 conference games. Not fun.
So now let's point this conversation toward the Pac-12 and Oregon. This is the first time, Mike, in going back through, you mentioned Nebraska, and of course that was a run of Nebraska to the Big Ten, Texas A&M, Mizzou to the SEC, Colorado, and then Utah popping up from the group of 5 into the Pac-12. Those were all moves that were logical based on geography and could be foreseen to a certain extent. And then Maryland, Rutgers to the Big Ten a few years later. People are throwing out, and I'm not talking about just crazy people online just coming up with things. I'm talking about like legitimate theories on how this could break because the Big Ten wants to keep up and because the Pac-12 and the ACC don't want to become irrelevant and all sorts of things that we could have some like, we're hearing crazy things. We're hearing like the Big Ten and the Pac-12 just coming together. We're hearing about the Big Ten. I don't see the Big Ten doing this because of the way they operate their league. But I've heard from fairly legitimate sources, the Big Ten just goes out to USC and UCLA and just rips them out. Again, that seems a bit too much because that doesn't seem like a Big Ten kind of move.
What I saw regarding that was USC, UCLA, I think it was Oregon and Washington. Or no, it was Oregon and Arizona State.
Can you imagine?
The Pac-12 would be gutted.
And that certainly wouldn't be an all-conference move, I wouldn't think. They're not. They're not going to fly USC women's soccer players to Rutgers a couple times and back out.
And I think the Pac-12 wouldn't have a choice but to let them stay for the other sports because UCLA is your main basketball school. Are you just going to let them walk out when they're willing to stay for basketball? Oregon's your best women's basketball team. Are you just going to make them leave when they're willing to stay for that? Or Washington, UCLA, and Oregon for softball. Like those are your best teams in the other sports. So they kind of be backed into a corner to have to let them just play one sport in the other conference.
So I'll make the same comment that I made when NIL erupted and everybody was asking, I'm sure you are asking me on a daily basis, what's going to happen? And I'll make the same comment. And I feel somewhat proud that Nick Saban made the same comment like a few weeks later. Basically, I'll give you all my theories. I'll give you all my ramification possibilities. I'll give you all my benefits versus negatives. And I'll do all that. But understand there's going to be things that are going to happen that nobody foresaw.
Mm-hmm.
So I will say the same thing here. I'll give you all my theories, and I have, but I want to give Mike the floor here, of course. So I know I'm asking you the impossible, Mike, but what do you think's going to happen? What are some of the possibilities that you think are more probable?
So when it comes to the Pac-12, my most realistic expectation is to add probably Oklahoma State and maybe another school. That's I don't think they're going to add that many teams. Like people are speculating them adding 4 to 6 teams. Like I don't think that's going to happen. If they add teams, it'll be Oklahoma State, one other school, and then I don't know. Outside of that, I think honestly this might be. I would say this is probably a 70% likelihood if I had to guess. Is that the Pac-12 and the Big 12 make a scheduling deal, where the Pac-12 Pac-12 and Big 10 make a scheduling deal, where they play a serpentine type schedule, and the top team of the Pac-12 in the next year would play the top team in the Big 10. Second team of the Pac-12 would play the second team of the Big 10. And I feel like that's a really logical way to keep your strength of schedule up with the SEC without completely dissolving your conference and dissolving maybe the Big 10 without losing your conferences for all the other sports. A scheduling agreement could be huge for both conferences. Ohio State would always have that extra marquee game. Oregon would have that extra marquee game. USC would. All the big programs would be most of the time playing the other big time programs, and they would draw massive ratings. The Rose Bowl does great every year.
Does that get a bit stale and boring, though? So if Ohio State's won the last, they're going on 5 consecutive Big Ten championships.
Mm-hmm.
And Oregon's playing as well as they are right now in the Pac-12. I know that they did and did not win the conference last year. They won the Pac-12 championship game and the year before. So if they make a commitment like that, and let's say the 2 plays the 2 and the 3 the 3, or whatever the agreement is, and most of these teams only play one big time opponent outside of the conference, and the likes of Oregon and Ohio State aren't looking at the SEC as a pool of teams that they're going to be scheduling on a regular basis, because there's this agreement between the Big Ten and the Pac-12 or the ACC that they're not including them in their mindset of scheduling.
So to work kind of around that, my thought would be that the Pac-12 and Big Ten, who both play 9-game conference schedules,
yes,
drop that to an 8-game conference schedule on par with the SEC, replace that 9th game with the Big Ten, and the top teams, hopefully, maybe they, some sort of like handshake agreement type thing, still try and schedule another top tier team outside of those 2 conferences to try and keep, because the goal for the top competitors is going to be to keep up with the strength of schedule of the top teams in the SEC and the ACC. And you're not going to do that only playing one out of conference power game. So you would have to, in a sense, kind of schedule that extra team, unless the Pac-12 or Big Ten ends up asserting themselves top to bottom as one of the better conferences and maybe arguably against the SEC. Because strength of schedule, I think it comes into play a lot for the people who are deciding who plays in the playoff. I think they look at strength of schedule a large amount when you look at the 2014 year when TCU didn't get in. It comes down at the end of the day, a lot of their rankings, if you question it, a certain strength of schedule metric might explain a lot of their rankings, and you just got to keep up with what the SEC schedule is going to be.
I look at it somewhat different. I understand what you're saying. It makes sense that there are going to be SEC schedules that are just going to be loaded with those 2 additions, and we'll see at what point the 12-team playoff comes to be. Right now, if you look back upon all the playoff seasons, 2014 through 2020, and then apply the 12-team model, basically 10-2 / 9-3 is the dividing line. If you go 10-2, I ran the numbers on and applied the model. If you go 10-2 as a Power 5 team during all those playoff years, you would have made the playoffs. If you went 9-3 / 10-3, meaning you played a conference championship game and lost, you're about 50-50. You're on the dividing line. That's where the playoff committee's making determinations. If you go 9-3 now in the SEC as it's going to be configured going forward, you're in the playoff.
Yeah, and if that Big Ten or Pac-12 school doesn't play a hard enough schedule and they're 10-2, that 9-3 SEC team could get in. That's why I think it would be advantageous for them to have that extra Power 5 game instead of playing Fresno State or North Dakota State or whoever they're playing. No disrespect to Fresno State and North Dakota State. They're good schools, but they're not going to get you that recognition for the committee. At the end of the day, the playoff committee is humans. And humans have biases. Humans have predeterminations. And you want to kind of appeal to that in a sense to where, all right, this team played a tough schedule and they wound up with a pretty good record.
I still see it in such a way that the SEC is going to be far and away the best conference. Already the best conference, and now we've got the 2 big additions, and doesn't one of these conferences want to step up and keep pace? And the Big Ten seems to be the most capable of doing that. They're the closest now, both on the field and in terms of money. And they seem to have the capability to go out there and lure in other teams to make them to help them
Yeah.
keep pace.
My thought on that is that, I mean, we're pretty sure if Notre Dame joins the conference, it's the ACC, right?
Yes.
So who is there to grab who will come? Who is going to come to the Big Ten? Unless you get the Oregon USC kind of grouping, who's going to come? Like, are you going to get Oklahoma State and Iowa State? Does that push the needle that much? Not really. It's the teams available to get are, if you could somehow magically pull Clemson out of the ACC, that's not happening. Or Notre Dame, probably also not happening. And then it's that Pac-12 grouping. I don't know what else there is for them to add that will sway public opinion or sway the perception of the conference is enough.
Yeah, and to your point, Iowa State people shouldn't be overestimating Iowa State based on recent success. Historically, they're a bottom dweller. Matt Campbell's done an amazing job, but market share, they play in the same state as Iowa. Like you're not gaining anything monetarily. And I think the Big Ten's going to look, I know the Big Ten's going to look at that. What value are we making the same amount of money with 2 editions and only distributing? So each team, each school gets less money. We can't do that. If I'm the Big Ten, and I can't really speak to Cincinnati's situation in regards to what else they bring to the table besides a good football program and a sizable TV market, Cincinnati. And I don't know what the distribution is in Cincinnati of Ohio State fans that they already have in Big Ten country versus watching UC football. I can't speak to that. But I at least research the Cincinnati edition, and this is outside the box. And I would do this if I were the ACC, and I would contemplate it if I were the Big Ten, but I would certainly do this for sure if I was the ACC, and that's go to UCF. Yes, that's been my baby during this whole thing.
So actually, the UCF point I really like. Now, when it comes to Cincinnati, I think that's kind of similar to Texas Tech, TCU, Baylor, and them. Although they are in these massive markets, my money puts that most of those massive markets are either Ohio State fans or Texas fans. I mean, unless Texas Tech is.
I don't even think those other schools are in massive markets except for TCU.
I meant
Baylor's in Waco, Texas Tech's in Lubbock
Houston instead of Texas Tech.
Yeah,
but yeah. So like Houston, TCU, those teams are in massive markets, but they're not going to pull the numbers in that market. Texas is pulling the numbers in that markets,
and they're NFL cities.
Yeah, and they're NFL as well. And when you're looking in Cincinnati, Cincinnati. I'm almost positive that most of those are Ohio State fans. Now, they do get good ratings. That's because they're a good football team. And the AAC is a solid conference, and they have other good football teams. They're good games. They're going to get decent ratings. When you have them playing UCF, UCF's fan base, as somebody who lives in Central Florida, it feels like that of a Power 5 team, if you ask me. Like that fan base is huge. They love their Knights. If you ever say something bad about UCF on Twitter, your mentions are done for. Like their fan base is huge. They have a quality football team. They're willing to spend the money. They have the big school. They're there. They can add something to your conference.
Yeah, and to play off of your later points, yes, UCF has shown that football is important to them. They want to be seen as a big time football school.
Yeah, they went and outbid Oregon to keep Scott Frost, and they outbid him and made him their head coach. And I mean, it's not for a school that hasn't always had the best football tradition before this run. They've had some good years. They've been solid, but to invest like that, they have a bright future. I don't think there's anything stopping them from being a solid Power 5 team within the next 10 years. Like they've been improving. They had that one rebuilding year between switching coaches, but they have a huge market, and it's an untapped market because Gainesville, North Florida, you got Florida State, way North Florida. I don't even consider Tallahassee part of Florida half the time. And then you got Miami way down south. There's this huge market, a massive amount of people that's completely untapped.
Absolutely. D-Rock watches enough to know that I've been pounding my fist about UCF here for a week now, specifically the ACC. But now, because I want to keep the geography, I would love to see college football maintain some geographical sense. But if the Big Ten's just going to go for broke,
UCF's
in the recruiting foothold, Ohio State's already down there, but maybe they do better for Penn State and others to get down there to Florida.
Yeah, if you're going to add for recruiting grounds, you just add like Houston and UCF and call it a day. You're set right there.
True. Yeah. Houston, there was an incredible statistic about it was connected to the Houston metro area and recruiting here in the last few years. The University of Houston, I know that they don't play amazing football, but they have in the past, of course, the Ed Oliver's team that beat Dalvin Cook and Florida State about 5 years ago in the Peach Bowl.
Who was their quarterback a while ago? Was it Warren Moon?
Well, it was De'Ara King.
Yeah. I'm talking about way back when they were good.
Oh, Andre Ware.
There you go.
The Heisman.
There you
89. That Houston, there was a statistic on one of those teams, and Ed Oliver was like the number one rated player in high school in the country, and he stayed and went to Houston. That they didn't have a player on their roster outside of like 18 miles or something like that. It was some ridiculous statistic like that.
The talent's huge there, man. There's so much talent.
And Ohio State already goes there and gets some players. Again, the rest of the Big Ten can't do that. Penn State.
One team can't carry a conference. We've seen Clemson try. We've seen Ohio State try. We've seen Oregon try. We've seen USC try. It's especially with how the SEC is loading up in this arms race. One team's not going to be able to do it. So you need the other schools to be able to tap into those markets.
The Big Ten already made a blunder 7, 8, 9 years ago going after Rutgers and Maryland. And that was, we just had a conversation with Matt, of course, on your show regarding digital media, online media versus cable and where the world's headed. And the Big Ten just got in the door at the deterioration of cable and didn't see it. They went after Maryland and Rutgers because of television markets, not because they play great football or basketball. I know Maryland has a nice basketball program, but they went after New York City, Baltimore, DC. That's what they were thinking.
Which in the 90s would have been a great play.
Yes.
Yeah, it's not that time no more. It's you gotta, as much as the people who are diehard college football fans are gonna hate this, the regional markets are mattering less and less when it comes to making money in college football. It doesn't matter what region you're in. The best team in the country over the last few years is in Tuscaloosa, Alabama. Like, I don't even know where Tuscaloosa is. I've been through Alabama many a times. I don't know where Tuscaloosa is. Like, your market does not matter. If you could market your team, if you could play good football, you'll get the ratings. So adding a team like Maryland and Rutgers just because they're in big cities isn't gonna do much anymore.
It would only matter if Ohio State was a free agent. Like if they were out there and they're in Columbus, Ohio, it's like a top 25 to 30 market, and the people there are watching Ohio State football. But in, like you said, Houston, they're not watching the University of Houston. They're NFL fans. New York City, they're not Rutgers fans. They're NFL fans.
Los Angeles is who's ever winning championships fans.
Yep.
If you're not winning, they're not watching.
I made the statement, even for as great as USC is and the potentials there, that when JT Tuimoloau was being wined and dined by USC, we had heard that they flew him over Los Angeles. And my response to that was, to look down upon all the people that are going to be ignoring his games, that are going to be watching NFL games on Sunday?
USC's fan base is massive when they're winning. When they're losing, it's nothing. It's just like any team in LA. The Lakers, ratings great when they're winning, terrible when they're losing. The Chargers, if they start winning, their ratings are going to be amazing. The Rams, ratings are terrible, started winning, ratings went up. If you're not winning, LA does not care what you're doing at all.
Yeah.
And Washington has the Seattle market to tap into. They did really great ratings wise when they were really good. They're doing okay now. It's just in a lot of these big markets, if you're not a really good team competing for that top spot in your sport, you're not going to get half of those people in that area to even blink an eye. There's so much to do in those cities, and there's so many other teams and other sports that they don't have to go watch a mediocre team.
Yeah. It's not Madison, Wisconsin.
Yeah, or Eugene, Oregon.
Yep. There you go.
Or Lincoln, Nebraska is the worst of them all. There's nothing but Nebraska football.